Last week we got into our first tutorial game, Catch the Clown. So we're going to take a few minutes today and just kind of revisit some of the key points of that game and some things to review and kind of summarize what we did in that. So first of all images that we loaded, those are called sprites. Sprites are the images that you load into your game. And as we will with all of our tutorial games, everything you load has to come from the resources folder in the K drive. So if you ever see anything other than resources up here, you're definitely in the wrong folder. Sometimes it might preload to a sprites folder or a sounds folder, whatever. But we know we always have to be in the resources folder for whichever game you're working on. That goes from my folder in the K drive. Now we had two sprites that we loaded here. We had our clown and our wall. And so I do want to show you one thing that you guys might have had to change when you uploaded that. So if I were to load a sprite, by default, this remove background option might be checked. So you can see that deletes a transparent portion of the image. In that case, it is the black. The GameMaker sees that as transparent. So if I uncheck that, the black and the border fills back in. The clown, if you ever needed it checked and I said you had a green box around it, that would be because your remove background was unchecked. So that's something to keep an eye on when you load in any sprites, is to see what your image looks like if it does have a transparent background or if any portion of the image itself is transparent when you load that in. That's a pretty important box that you're going to want to check anytime you do load in any sprites. Sound effects that we used for this, we had some wave files. Waves are great for sound effects, while MIDIs are great for music. Only one MIDI file can play at a time. So later on, if you ever get to a point where you're trying to put in a couple different songs or sound effects, you cannot have two MIDI files playing at the same time. But some of the resources we use have some great MIDI music from popular artists today, all the way back to some old 8-bit games in the Nintendo days. But primarily, we will be using waves as our sound effects and MIDIs as our background music sounds. We're going to be messing with backgrounds a little bit more in our next game, where we're going to be adding some title screen and some alternate backgrounds to Catch the Clown as you make it a 3-level game. One thing that is very useful is anytime you do load a background in, is you want that to match whatever the size of your room is. So you can see here the settings in our room are 640 by 480. And we ended up having to kind of stretch this out a little bit, or actually tile it when you loaded that in. So if we were to go to background, so you can see it's tiled vertically and horizontally, that's the actual size of that background. So you can tile it, or if I were just to re-stretch this to match the size of my room, so let's double check this here. My room settings are 640 by 480, and I can just go to edit background, transform, and stretch, and I'm going to uncheck my aspect ratio here and go to, oh shoot, I already forgot. I think it was 6. I'm going to forget that one. So let's double check. Let's close that. 640, 480. It's going to create a little bit of a blurry effect, but now if I were to look at my backgrounds, it's no longer tiled in. Now, you do run the risk if you stretch something that's such a small file size, a small size in terms of pixels, then you are going to have that issue. So what we'll do later on is we're going to create everything in PowerPoint and import it and then stretch it to a specific size and then upload that into our game. Okay, I'm just going to reload that background at default and not worry about changing the size. Good. And go back to my room, backgrounds, and tile that back up. There we go. All right, now a couple things about our objects here. Remember, anything that you put in your game has to be an object. Sprites are just images. Objects, those are items that you actually interact with. So with your wall, in this case, we didn't have to do a whole lot with it. We just wanted to make sure it was visible and it was solid. If it wasn't solid, then I'm going to imagine that your clown went right through it. And so there's our object wall. And again, you can select whatever sprite you want to align to each object. For our object clown, we had a few things here. Number one, we wanted it to be visible. And then we did have some events that we needed to get programmed in. So what do these events do? First, the create just establishes that the clown will be present when the game starts, and he's going to move in these directions at this speed. When he's created, it's also going to play the music file that we have. In that case, that's our background music. And this alarm is relative is what's going to partly allow it to change directions automatically. Steps are increments of time, and you can do some research online to find out exactly how many steps equals a second and so on. But in this case, we're just told to make it 50 steps, so that's what we went with there. Here we established our alarm, making sure that it changes directions as well. Bouncing against the wall, and then also triggering a sound effect right there. That's a collision event with a bounce action. And then our left press, first it's going to set the score to 10 every time we do click on that clown. And what this relative does in this case is it's plus 10 every time you click it. So it adds 10. That's what relative does, is it adds to whatever the previous value was. If this was unchecked, then every time you click the clown, it's just going to set the score to 10. Every time. You can click it 100 times, you'll never get a score greater than 10. So that's why it's really important that happens. And you see this show up again with the move. If this is unchecked, it's going to set the speed to 0.5. With its checked relative, it's going to add 0.5 onto whatever its previous speed was. So relative plays a key role in this game and some others that you'll be playing around with as well.